answer specific questions regarding specific children during this. We're going to be giving you some general information. And like Teresa said, you could always email us or contact our firm and schedule an intake with any of our attorneys when you have questions specifically with regard to your child. The other thing is there's a lot of information that we have and a lot of information that we don't have. And we have been saying since this all started, we've been saying, I don't know, more in the last 8 months than we have in the last 20 years. So we are learning as we go. And what we do is we are updating our website regularly and trying to keep up to date with everything that's happening on a real-time basis. The websites and information that we're referring to tonight are on our website, and in the chat box, I put how to access it. It's on our resource page on our website, and it's titled This Presentation, NAVLA and Family Focus Resource Center.
I'm not sure. Please, I think it's Elvira. Could you? Thank you.
Sorry if I muted somebody that doesn't want to be muted, but okay. So I am Dina Kaplan. I am an attorney with Newman Aaronson Vanaman. I'm also the parent of a 26-year-old son who's got multiple physical, developmental, mental health challenges, which is how I got into this area of the law to begin with. I was an attorney before I had him. And as you all know, life changes when you're the parent of a child with special needs. And there was this whole area of the law that I knew nothing about and learned about pretty rapidly. So, and with that, I'm going to introduce Jody.
Hi, I'm Jody Binder. I am an attorney with Newman Aaronson Vanaman as well, and I've been here for pretty much my entire career. I grew up in the office, as we like to say. So I started working here as a file clerk in college and was redirected from going to get my master's in social work to law school, and I've been here almost, other than 2.5 years, for almost 30 years here. So happy to do this rewarding work. And tonight we want to try to update you with some information, update you on the law, update you on the county health ordinances, update you on what's happening with assessments, and then leave lots of time for questions and answers. So I'm going to start with the update on the law. Essentially, the federal law has not changed. So the IEPs are governed by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and all of the requirements of that statute remain in effect. The state law, though, has been changed. So it's been amended to add some provisions for distance learning. So there was a Senate bill called Senate Bill 98, which was a budget act, which was enacted at the end of June. And that actually added some sections to the California Education Code to provide for distance learning. So they define distance learning as instruction in which an instructor and a student are in different locations, and the student is under the supervision of a certificated employee. And this is just for general education students. And that distance learning can include interaction, instruction, and check-ins between teachers and pupils through the use of a computer or a communications technology. That would include video, audio instruction, instructional television, all different kinds of technology. And it also includes the use of printed materials that incorporate the assignments that are the subject of written or oral feedback. So that's generally what the requirements, generally what distance learning can include, but it also must include academic and other supports designed to address the needs of pupils not performing at grade level, including students with exceptional needs. And it must include special education, related services, and any other services required by a student's IEP. So we've got that piece that applies to all of the students, and then we're moving into the special ed piece. So what's happened is, in addition to adding these few sections, the legislature also amended what needs to be contained in an IEP. And so in addition to present levels of performance and eligibility and goals and objectives and placement, they now have to have, in addition to that, a description of the means by which the IEP will be provided under emergency conditions. So now what you're going to start seeing, because this became effective the end of June, So it's going to apply to any new IEP as well as any annual IEPs. And this is in place until the end of 2021, I believe. You are going to see either an additional separate page for those of you not in LA Unified. I've been seeing it as a separate page, or in LA Unified, they're adding it to the FAPE page too. So you see those grids with the offers, and then underneath, they're now adding language that says, during distance learning, we're going to provide these services to the extent we can as follows. And they provide for different means to do that. And some of it is asynchronous learning, some of it is synchronous learning, some of it is email check-ins. There's about 5 different categories, and then they have boxes that they check for each of the services offered in your IEP. And essentially, the ones I've seen, they're checking every box for every category, which is basically just giving them free range for how they're going to implement these IEPs. What becomes a question, though, is whether this emergency implementation is part of the IEP and whether it's part of the offer of FAPE. So in case you don't know, FAPE stands for Free Appropriate Public Education, and that's what the district's obligated to offer to you through the IEP. And it's a program that's going to essentially allow your child to make reasonable progress in light of their circumstances. It includes the program and services and what have you to do so. And so this is now, the way I'm seeing it, it's like a separate plan within your IEP. There's sort of 2 plans now, and they're still required to provide a program that's going to allow your child to make the expected progress. So when you're signing your IEP and when you're looking at your IEPs, I think it's really important to look at whether you can.
Jody, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself? Sorry.
I don't know how that just happened, but okay. You need to look at, I think, both plans, and that is, given what's happening now, is your child able to access the curriculum with the emergency plan that's been put in place? And separately from that, if this emergency, if they are allowed to go back to school in normal times, would the IEP meet your child's needs? And so when you sign your IEP, I think you need to consent or disagree with both. So the emergency plan, just like the IEP as a whole, can't be implemented without your consent. And the teams are still required to develop a plan that's going to meet your child's needs. So with all of that being said, take a look at both and make sure you think about both when you're signing your IEP. The other thing to do, though, is to, if it's not working, you can request a new IEP meeting, but also just keep documenting. We can't say this enough. Just keep track of what's being provided, how often it's being provided, what's happening while your child's trying to access it. Are they getting up? Are they, hiding under the table? Are they able actually to benefit from the instruction? Keep a running log, because at this time, we still don't know what's going to happen, what kind of compensatory services may or may not be available later. We're still taking the position that the districts are obligated to offer the services in your IEP. And if your child's not benefiting from what's being provided, then perhaps there's arguments for compensatory services at a later time. There was quite a bit of flexibility, well, not quite a bit, but there's some flexibility written into the statute to allow the districts to have some different means to provide services during the emergency time. So, it's all sort of up in the air at the moment. We haven't seen a lot of decisions come down yet. There have been a few with very specific fact scenarios that are working in favor of parents, but this is still sort of a road to be seen as we move forward. So please document. The other piece that I think gives districts a little more flexibility than I personally care for, what can be provided are check-ins between teachers and pupils. And so while the additional sections of the statute that were added to address distance learning do provide for certain instructional minutes that have to be provided, it's still, I mean, I'm sure all of you were seeing far less instruction with your kids than when they were in class full time. And that the question is whether, to me, that's one of the big questions, is that going to be deemed sufficient? Just the speech therapist checking in with you saying, hey, how's everything going? Here's an exercise to work on for the next week. Or, you know, the resource teacher checking in by phone once a week and or by email or by video once a week for 30 minutes. But your child's IEP calls for, you know, an hour a day of services or something to that effect. So just keep track of what's happening, keep track of how services are being delivered. And, you know, that's where we are at the moment with that. We have some updates on the county health ordinances as well, which are what are still controlling what the local districts can and can't do. And Dina is going to update you on that piece, and then as well as on the assessments.
Okay, and before I start that, how many of you had to look up in the dictionary what the difference is between synchronous and asynchronous? I mean, this whole thing is driving me a little bit nuts. And the way that services are delivered and education is delivered right now, many of my clients, the moms are acting as their children's one-to-one aide. Several of our clients have had to quit their jobs to be their child's one-to-one aide. And something that Jody said that was really important is looking at your IEP, because what's being written now is it's being written to implement when your child goes back to school and also in the interim for distance learning. And it's going to be really important to scrutinize that. And if your child is not benefiting from distance learning now, you need to make sure that your IEP team knows that and have a discussion about it. And ultimately, you may end up having to go to due process, but we'll talk about that. So what we're dealing with here is the federal law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the state law, which is the California California Education Code. And in what is coinciding with that is the county health department because of COVID-19. So what is controlling? Right now, the health department is controlling everything because they're saying it's not safe to go back to school unless certain conditions are met. So what they have on the county health department website in what they've provided to the school districts are reopening protocols. They have what they're calling a staged approach that's supported by science and public health expertise to enable schools serving students from kindergarten through grade 12 to reopen safely. And so what does that mean? Well, there's a lot of protocols that need to be followed. The health order was recently updated at the end of October, and it modified the proportion of students who may receive specialized services on campus at any one time. It started out as only 10%. And now they say all schools may have up to 25% of full student capacity on campus at one time to provide in-person specialized support and services to students with high need. And that includes students with IEPs and also students who are English language learners. And there's also, I also included a link to the list of schools that have applied for a waiver to start bringing back students from TK to grade 2, and they can bring back up to 25% of the students. And if you look, that's an LA County list that I've put on our website. I haven't done Ventura County or any of the other surrounding counties. I do know that Ventura County started this past week bringing back students on a part-time basis, or maybe 2 weeks ago, on a part-time basis and at less capacity than full capacity. And some families have chosen to stay with distance learning, and some have chosen the hybrid model. And so we're looking at what's happening now, and it's happening in LA Unified extremely slowly and very frustratingly for a lot of parents. I think the smaller districts are moving much more quickly. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a special ed director up in the Santa Clarita Valley, and his schools are already starting to bring back the kids with special needs, and they have a plan for reopening for everybody within the next, well, hopefully by January. So However, this is all dependent on the increase of COVID and what's happening, and whether or not we're going to have more quarantines and you know, like I said, we don't know a lot, and everything changes minute by minute. And then something to be aware of with regard to LA Unified is Austin Butner has said that, you know, his district is planning to reopen and to do assessments and services for children with special needs, as well as to reopen eventually for all students. However, we don't see that really happening very much. And what I'm informed of is that there's about 10% of the professionals going back to work, and that includes teachers, psychologists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, and they are the ones that are choosing to go back to work. Not everybody is. And so some children are being assessed. Now, just to back up for a second, so assessments were put on hold for a short period of time. And then the law was amended to bring the timelines for assessments back, meaning the school district has to do their assessments within 60 days of the parent consenting to the assessment plan and hold the IEP meeting. Is that happening right now? No, there are so many assessments that are backed up. We really don't know who's getting priority, how the assessments are being divided up between the people who are doing assessments. I do know that some parents who have been lucky enough to be provided with an assessment, some of them are having to travel across LA County to get the assessment because there's nobody in their area that's doing the assessment. So, and this is all just sort of anecdotal information right now, because as far as we know, LA Unified is doing this very, very slowly. The other districts, I was looking the other day at Las Virgenes, they have a whole protocol on their website. They show their psychologists all dressed in safety equipment, personal protective equipment, and doing assessments, and the children on the other side doing assessments, participating. So it can be done, but all of this is also dependent on how safe you as family members feel about all of this, and bringing your children to a site and having them assessed in person. Now, some districts and some psychologists are doing assessments virtually as well as they can. And if a child is absolutely going to be able to participate in that assessment, that's great. If they try and they start the assessment and it's pretty clear that the child's not benefiting from the assessment, you as a parent can always say, look, this is not working. We're going to have to postpone it until such time as we can do it in person. So those are some of the things that are happening. And I know that you will all have a lot of questions. So I do want to get to a lot of the questions, but just keep in mind, when you're looking at what's happening, look at the county health orders first, because they're going to control over the law. And even the federal and state law that says kids need to be educated, kids with IEPs need to be provided a free, appropriate public education. It's not necessarily going to happen if we have another COVID shutdown. And right now we're just starting to gear back up from that. So that's basically all we know for now. And I'm happy to take a look at some of the questions. Teresa, have you been keeping an eye on the questions?
Yes, I have. You ready for some?
Sure.
Okay, so let's start with, one second here. A lot of them are, you know, a little specific, but I can start with, I have an IEP already that was supposed to have been a triennial that became an annual review because evaluations were not conducted. I also have an IEP with my other son in which the IEP team did not know what the distance learning plan in the IEP was or how to complete it. Your advice on that?
You want to answer that, Jody?
Well, with respect to the assessment, you know, I mean, the districts have not been given any waivers with respect to, well, there was a period of time where they didn't have to respond to requests for assessments. They were given some, in California, they were given some relief there, but that was, that waiver is no longer in effect. They are, as of now, required to conduct their assessments, comply with all timelines. So I would say the district's going to have to, I would think that you would have some arguments if the district's not in compliance, unless when that IEP was held was during that period of the waiver. So it, to me, creates a lot of arguments that the district may not have accurate information on which it's basing its goals. You know, it raises some questions about the appropriateness of the IEP. And those would be the aspects that we would be looking at. And I'm sorry, remind me of the second part of the question, please.
The second part was, I think, I'm sorry, moved away from that question. Let's see. May have to go back to that second part because we have quite
I
a
know what
few.
it was.
And
It was with regard to the distance learning plan that the district didn't know how to do it.
Right. Well, again, I think that goes to an argument that the district failed to appropriately draft your IEP, and will potentially give you some arguments for additional services at a later time. That doesn't necessarily help now. So if what they are ultimately providing is not working, then I would ask to go back to an amendment IEP to really hone in on what can be done during the distance learning program and make it be more specific in your IEP.
I know that there's a question that I keep getting, and I think it's in here somewhere in the list of questions that I wanted to address, and that was with regard to a one-to-one. And if your student has a one-to-one on his or her IEP, and can they be provided with a one-to-one at home, either through the district or through a non-public agency? And the answer to that question is probably not. I know that LA Unified has been maintaining the fact that they will not provide any services in a child's home due to liability issues at this point. And the interesting thing is even kids who are on home instruction are not getting in-home instruction. They're getting the virtual instruction as well. So, you know, and then I've seen other families who have ABA services for their children with autism through insurance. And some of those providers have been willing to provide help during school time, but most of them are not. And so it becomes the private agencies, if they're being paid by the district, will not go into a home to provide the services when a district tells them that they're not allowing it. So, other questions?
okay, I have another question. And just to let all our guests know that this is valuable information. So if you have your computers or your pen, paper, be ready to jot down some answers. So here's one. My son's, this is from Miriam, my son's annual IEP is coming up in a month. Will they ask me to reduce services to reflect what they are providing now? And do I have to agree to the reductions?
You absolutely do not have to agree to the reductions. I guess I'm not entirely clear on whether what they're providing now is consistent with what was in his IEP before the emergency services went into place. But no, I mean, it's from my perspective, you should be treating this as your IEP without the COVID restrictions, and look at what your child needs. And then when they offer the emergency learning plan or distance plan, then it shouldn't be a reduction in services. It may be a difference in the delivery of services. But you should ask them specifically at the IEP what is being provided. And, you know, it depends. It could be specialized academic instruction. It could be resource time. It could be occupational therapy, speech therapy. So find out specifically how they plan to do it. And as I mentioned earlier, it's part of your IEP, this emergency plan. So you need to consent to it for it to be implemented. So no, you don't have to agree to any reductions if you don't think they're appropriate. And you should let them know that at the time, and then you can sign your IEP accordingly.
One thing I wanted to jump in here with too is Jody and I were talking about how to sign your IEPs now that they have distance learning plans included. And I know Jody touched on it in the beginning, but it's going to be really important to differentiate what you're agreeing to and what you're not agreeing to. And you can always agree to implement the IEP and the distance learning plan, even if you don't think it provides a FAPE for your child. And then you can see how it works. And if it's not working and your child is showing regression, then your next step is to go to due process, which is, for those of you who don't know what due process is, it's a complaint that we file with the Office of Administrative Hearings when there's ever a disagreement about an IEP, what should be in an IEP, whether there should be an IEP, and services, supports, assessments, any disagreement with the district. We can take to due process, and that's what our firm does on a regular basis. Other questions, Teresa?
Yes. Here's one. My child has weekly behavioral services. The school has not been providing services weekly, but instead they're doubling up 1 week and skipping the next. What can I do to make the school provide those services weekly?
I don't know if those services are being provided virtually or not, but if your student's supposed to have weekly ABA services, then your student should be having weekly ABA services. One of the things I wanted to mention is we have on our website on the resource page also a log that you can download. It's a form that you can fill in on a daily basis, and you should keep track of what is being provided, what's on the IEP, what's being provided, and how your child is either accessing it, not accessing it, benefiting from it, not benefiting from it. It's going to be really important if we look back and determine we want to show that your child has regressed and is entitled to compensatory services. And because this is such a unique time, the only way we're going to be able to do that is if you keep good records. So it's going to be extremely important. And I've said this, and we've said this hundreds of times already. We know that you're overwhelmed. We're also overwhelmed trying to be everything to everybody in our families and our jobs and taking care of our children right now. And it's extremely overwhelming, but it's going to be extremely important moving forward to get some compensatory services for your child.
And just to add one more point, that I think part of the question was what can you do if they're not providing the services weekly? And I would, first address the district and say, hey, you're not complying with the IEP. My child needs the services weekly. Do everything in writing so you keep a written trail of what's been going on, a paper trail. And then if they deny it, then you have the right to file for due process if they're not implementing the IEP, or file a compliance complaint with the state, which to me, you get typically better results through due process, but you have both options.
And just so you know, if you've never filed or you don't know what a compliance complaint is that if you have a claim that the district is out of compliance with the law with regard to your IEP, you can file a complaint with the State Department of Education. And they will do an independent evaluation and determine whether the district is out of compliance or not. The only problem with the compliance complaints, and you as parents can do those on your own, what we find is that they don't have a lot of bite to them. Even if they find that the district is out of compliance, they don't usually order any kind of compensatory services. They just tell the district to come back into compliance. So we don't love those compliance complaints, but there's certainly a way to go if you want to go that avenue.
Okay, we have a question here. If my child has been diagnosed with ADD and the doctor recommended an IEP, but the school wants to go through a SSPT before an IEP, is the doctor recommendation not a valid request to get a kid evaluated for an IEP?
Take it away, Jody.
You don't need a doctor's request. You need the parent's request. And it should be in writing. And if you request an assessment in an IEP, this SST meeting, student study team meeting, is sort of It's not in the statute. The districts are not required to hold that to determine whether or not an assessment is warranted. So they typically do, and then either they refer them for an assessment or not. But if you make a specific request, and I would do it yourself, not just turn in your doctor's recommendation, make a specific request in writing for an IEP and an assessment, they have to either comply with that or they have to send you notice why they're not going to comply with it. It's called prior written notice. So they would then have to send you a letter saying, based on whatever grades and what have you, we don't think an assessment is warranted. And then you would have to explore your options from that point, which could be seeking an independent assessment, which could be, again, filing for due process or what have you. But just responding with, we'll convene a student study team meeting is not, in my opinion, complying with their legal obligation.
I like to refer to it as a student stall team meeting. Yeah, no, just so you know, it's not, it's like Jody says, it's not in the law, and they can't use an SST meeting to delay doing an assessment. If you file a written request for an assessment, date it, keep a copy of it, and make sure you get it date stamped, or at least in this age, what I'm telling parents is, because you're mostly not going into the school, send it by email, request confirmation that it's been received. And then, like Jody said, they're going to have to respond in writing with an assessment plan or a reason why they're not going to assess. So
I'm not sure what school district, but because it may be different, but I have a parent asking, are these assessments that are being done, are they in person or are they remotely assessments?
it depends.
Right.
Some of them are being done in person, but and depending on what school district you're in, you're likely to have an assessment sooner if you're in a smaller school district than you are in LA Unified, an in-person assessment. Now, I do know that some of the psychological assessments and the cognitive assessments that the psychologists and the resource teachers administer, they've been trying to contact the different companies that provide the tests and get some protocols in terms of how they can be implemented virtually, and how and whether they are what's the word, accurate, valid. That's another word. If done virtually, and how they could do it virtually. And I don't know all the answers to that, but I imagine some of them can be done somewhat virtually. Some of them can be done not at all. So I think it really depends on the assessment that's being used and the psychologist or teacher or whoever's doing the assessment. So.
Okay. Can you file a CDE formal complaint on your own as a parent if they aren't completing assessments in time?
Yes, that's a compliance complaint. And definitely you can file it on your own. There's a form on the California Department of Education website. You just have to search their site for compliance complaints, and then it'll come up and you can fill out the form. And they'll investigate. They have 60 days. Did I say that before? They have 60 days to investigate.
Okay, let me see. Let me read this here. With the new emergency plan associated with the IEP, will that entail service provider hours? Meaning, will the school be suggesting a reduction in service hours while in DL? And when in person, a different amount of hours? Or is it child specific?
I think it's child specific. I think it's district specific. I didn't see on the LA Unified proposal that they were proposing a change in the amount of time. I think they're just giving themselves a variety of ways that it can be implemented. So you may perceive it as a reduction in service, because if your child's supposed to get, let's say, 1 hour a week of speech therapy in a small group, and instead you're getting the speech therapist contacting you and saying, engage in these social stories this week with your child, and do these couple of games or what have you, and I'll check in with you next week, even though the amount of time you're spending may correlate to the amount of time on the IEP. I don't think that that's a valid implementation. But again, they're being given, them being the districts, are being given some latitude with respect to how that can be done. So I don't think that the emergency plans in the IEP are going to differ much from the services offered in the FAPE offer. But it's all new, and I'm not entirely sure all the districts know what they're doing. I mean, I have an IEP for one student now in a non-LA unified district where they're clearly saying with this plan, this is not part of our offer of FAPE. And yet it actually is. And it doesn't make sense if it's not, because then what's being implemented? It's again, confusing, and we don't have all the answers. But I think that they have to commit to if the child needs X amount of time per week for a particular service, then that's the amount of time that should be in both plans, whether it's the main offer or this emergency offer.
Thank you. Next question. Is it legal for the one-to-one to give the instruction and not the teacher? The teacher is not even in the same room. She's taking care of other kids. Is this a compliance complaint or a due process complaint?
Depends on what they're actually doing. I mean, is the teacher giving the aide work to work on with the child that the teacher has already taught the child, or is teaching the child? I mean, it really depends on the situation, because one-to-ones can work with a child on academics, but they shouldn't be the teacher.
It has to be under the, sorry, Dina, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It has to be under the supervision of a certificated employee. So that's, that, as Dina was saying, that's really going to be the question. Are they going to be able to claim that this is supervised instruction, I think.
Right. And if you feel that your child is not being taught appropriately, then yes, you can file a compliance complaint, or in this case, also a due process complaint might be appropriate. I saw a couple questions here that I wanted to respond to. One was, what's your feeling about having pediatricians or medical doctors attend IEPs? And I don't think doctors should go to IEP meetings, because what happens is the IEP team says, you're a medical professional, you deal with what's medical, and we deal with what's educational. And we don't have to listen to your medical opinion, we listen to our educational opinion. So I don't think really it's appropriate for MDs to attend IEP meetings. However, that doesn't mean that a developmental pediatrician can't do an assessment and provide it to the IEP team. It really depends on the situation. Did you have a comment about that, Jody?
No, I think there are sometimes a couple exceptions to the rule, and a developmental pediatrician would be one of them, because they can correlate the developmental lags to the educational component typically. The other time sometimes would be I don't know, a psychiatrist, if they're providing treatment, like the ones that, if it's a child with emotional issues who's been hospitalized and there's been ongoing treatment, as opposed to just medication management, somebody who can really make that connection. But I agree with Dina that typically they're deemed medical and not educational, and the value of having them at the IEP becomes limited.
Right. The other question is, can you think of a circumstance where it would be prudent to request a 504 plan and an IEP at the same time? So for those of you who don't know, a 504 plan is, refers to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which was the first anti-discrimination statute. Basically says you can't discriminate against somebody because of their disability. And what it provides for a student in a learning environment is reasonable accommodations to access their education. And so those can be done relatively quickly, don't require major assessments to be done. Whereas the IEP process could take a lot longer when there's 60 days, typically 60 days to do the assessment and hold the IEP meeting. And now that assessment time might even be extended given everything that's going on. So I would say if the child needs some accommodations right away, you can definitely develop a 504 plan first. There's nothing preventing that. And then once an IEP happens, if the child's found eligible, the 504 accommodations would be included in the IEP document.
And I'm just going to tack on another comment because I saw a question about whether this applies to 504s as well, the information that we're giving. And the distance learning plan that's in the California Education Code is general education. It applies to general education students, so it would apply to a student with a 504 as well. And I think whatever accommodations are needed to allow that student to access the curriculum should be included in the distance learning plan. To access the curriculum in the distance learning model should be included in that distance learning plan as well.
Here's a question on compensatory. Will families have to pay anything out of pocket first before getting any money back at on the end part afterwards? So with the compensatory, does that mean the families having, yeah, that's the question. If they have to put any money out before they get paid from the school district.
We're both like chomping at the bit. It just entirely depends on the type of service. The answer to that question is no. If compensatory services are awarded for the lack of the district's providing services, and you go through either an informal dispute resolution process or due process or what have you, the district can offer compensatory services and fund them directly. If you're seeking, it really is sort of fact dependent. If you're seeking certain providers that are not providers with whom the district's contract, or there's no agreement that you are entitled to those services, you would need to give notice to the district that you're going to provide them. And you do that in writing and you say, we don't think district, what you're providing our child is meeting their needs. We think they're regressing or what have you. And so we're going to provide speech therapy, appears to be on my mind tonight, speech therapy with, the ABC speech therapist, and we intend to seek reimbursement from the district for all costs incurred. And that is a requirement in the law. If you've been given your parent rights at any IEP meeting, then you are deemed to be aware of this, what we call 10-day notice requirement. So 10 days prior to providing any private services, you need to give written notice to the district that you intend to provide the service because the district's services are not meeting your child's needs, and that you intend to seek reimbursement from the district for those costs. And then that ensures your right to seek reimbursement. It doesn't guarantee you reimbursement. There's never any guarantee, but it ensures your right to seek reimbursement at a later time. So it really can go either way, depending on what you're seeking and when you're seeking it, and whether the district's in agreement or not agreement at that time. So do you have anything to add to that, Dina?
No, I was just going to say it shouldn't cost you any money out of pocket if you're not already paying for services. You can definitely file for due process and get compensatory education provided by the district. And usually it's going to be provided by an agency that has a contract with the district, depending on the district and depending on the agency. So.
Did you see any more you wanted to take, Dina? There was one, what was the, it's quite a few, but I didn't know if there was some you wanted to touch on in a row.
There was one about the district. Can the district decide what assessments and evaluations they want to do if the parent has decided they want to? And I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's a comprehensive reassessment that the parent is wanting. And you can ask the district to do any kind of assessment that you think is going to give information regarding your child's disability. So the law says that a child has to be assessed in all areas of his or her suspected disability. So if you think that your child, for example, might have ADHD, then you want to have your child assessed for any attentional issues. So you can tell the district what your concerns are and why you're requesting an assessment. If they agree to the assessment, they'll provide you with an assessment plan within 15 days of your requesting. If they disagree, then they're required to give you, again, this prior written notice. And it's very interesting because there was a time when prior written notice was never given. And now it's being given all the time for every little thing. And in fact, I have a case right now in a county outside of this local area, out in the desert, and their statutory forms for IEPs have prior written notice checkboxes in them. And I am going to bat over this because I think it's totally inappropriate. But in any event, it should be a separate document that is sent to the parent in language that's understandable by the parent as to what the district is denying or agreeing to, why they are, what they've used to rely on to make that decision, and what you can do if you disagree. So really important.
There's a question just on this assessment topic about the assistant principal saying there's nobody to do the in-person assessment. So what can be done? If the district is saying it can't do the assessment, but there are people who can do it, then I would write to the district and say, if you can't complete this assessment, then you need to fund it with one of these assessors who's following the county health guidelines and is able to conduct the assessment, and see if you can get it done privately at district expense that way. And then here's on a different subject, another question. The student won't come back to the online class after only attending a portion, or either you get on or you don't get on, but then who's canceling the class and does it matter? So I think it does matter because attendance is being taken. So you don't want to be deemed truant. But I think this is one of those times where you're documenting. You're sending emails to the teacher. My child logged on this morning. He lasted 5 minutes and I can't get him to come back on, because of X, Y, and Z, or whatever the case may be. But I think you need to document that, and you need to keep a written record and keep in communication with the teacher in writing, or the assistant principal or whomever, about the fact that you can't get your child to comply with the online distance learning program. And ask for help, ask what else can be done. Like, that's their job. They need to figure this out. And if they don't, then again, you have the right to pursue compliance complaints or due process or what have you, or reconvene an IEP meeting and say, this isn't working. What are we going to do?
Right. That's a good thing too. You don't have to wait for your child's annual IEP to ask for a new IEP if things are not working. So don't be afraid to ask for a new IEP. Again, do it in writing. Make sure you keep a copy of it. Here's an interesting question, and it's regarding changing school districts. The children are out of one school district and starting another school district, and the question is, will they need a new IEP? And I don't know if they have a current IEP, but if they move to the new school district with a current IEP, the new school district has 30 days during which they have to honor that current IEP and then decide if they're going to do new assessments or not, or honor that IEP going forward, and or make their own IEP, basically. So essentially, when a child comes into a district with an IEP, then the school district has to honor that IEP for 30 days. If the child doesn't have an IEP but needs an IEP, you can register your child at their school of residence and indicate to the people when you register that your child has had an IEP in the past, they don't have a current IEP, and you should probably request a new IEP, but shouldn't prevent them from starting school, depending on whether they're starting virtually or not. But it would be in your best interest to share any prior IEPs and any prior assessments with the new school district. So I thought that was an interesting question. Okay. What else? Oh, here's an interesting question.
Oh, sorry, I was talking. I didn't realize I was on mute. This is from a family, Westside Union School District. My child's speech class is very inconsistent and it gets canceled most of the time. I am being told that the time cannot be made up and that the therapist is the only one for that specific school. What is our best option to make up the lost time?
Go to due process and get compensatory services from an outside agency. That's the short answer. Yeah, if the teacher is canceling the service, then they have to make it up, and the parent should keep track of the services that are not being provided. Again, how many times a week is the child getting speech therapy, and how many times a week, and what the hours are that the child's actually being provided the therapy, and how many hours are owed. And you can always go to due process to ask for reimbursement, or to ask for compensatory services to make up for that speech therapy that hasn't been provided. I see this happen a lot in smaller school districts when there's not enough people to go around, essentially.
Here's an interesting question. Can schools just pause work towards specific goals on the IEP if they are having trouble implementing virtually? No, they're required to work on the IEP goals that were determined appropriate for your child. They don't get a pass because they're having difficulty virtually. So no, they have to continue to work on those goals.
And here's another interesting question. With the new guidelines for this school year, are teachers legally allowed to record a small group synchronous session? And this is through LAUSD district. And that's a good question. They're not supposed to, because there are privacy issues. I think if they get the permission from every parent to do it, then it's okay. But I'm not even sure why they would be recording it. But legally, there's some serious privacy issues.
Sorry, I think something just came out about that, and I don't have that I don't have it at my fingertips, but I feel like the teachers are allowed to audio record, but not video record, and parents are not allowed to record, if I remember correctly.
At all? Well, I didn't see that, but that's kind of typical of what we're seeing in IEP meetings too, even if they're done virtually, that you can the parent, if you give notice in advance, 24 hours in advance, you can audio record your IEP meeting, but you can't video record it. But I'm concerned about that in terms of recording a class and a teacher doing a class with students. I mean, I guess if the teacher's the only one that's being shown on the video, I guess that would be okay from a privacy perspective.
If my district says a records review was sufficient for the triennial, he is still eligible. Can I ask for, okay, now I can't see it. Can I, oh, just went away. What happened? Can I ask for what? Oh my gosh, sorry.
I'm not.
You want to finish that sentence, Chris?
Sure. Can I ask for assessments when, assessments are back available?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think what they're saying is just a records review for the triennial, and then what's going to happen when when schools actually get back into session for real. Yes, you can always ask for an assessment at that time, and it would be appropriate for them to do a new assessment at that time. But this is what we're seeing also, record reviews and talking to teachers and getting parent input as the way that they're doing IEPs right now, and getting present levels of performance for the children. And they're not always 100% accurate at this point, because we really don't know, because it's such an unusual setting for our children to be learning. So anyway, I think that we're going to all have a slew of IEPs when schools actually start to reopen again.
Oh, things are just jumping around here. Do you want to grab some? Do you see any that you want to keep in the row?
I saw one here. If my child's reading needs have not been met in 3 years, can I request some type of one-on-one reading services in a private center be provided by the district? And the answer to that question is yes, but you will not get it without going to due process. But keep in mind that there's a 2-year statute of limitations. So if I were you, I would go to due process right away. Because if your child has not made progress for 3 years, it's going to be really important to get a reading intervention program. And what I'm seeing now is that the districts say that they have reading intervention programs, like specific remediation programs. And I've been looking at some of the programs that they do have, and they're not as intensive or as appropriate for kids, for example, who've been diagnosed with dyslexia. And reading remediation requires every day, several hours of the day intervention. And I just don't see the schools having the ability to provide that. So.
I've been hearing this one actually quite a bit. Can the school kick out your child on an IEP if they've been missing a lot of school days because the child is not able to complete schoolwork?
Is that during the distance learning?
Yeah.
I assume so.
They can't, the child has an IEP, did you say? They can't just kick
Yeah,
them
it says,
out.
can the school kick out your child if they have an IEP? But they're missing a lot of school days because the child is just not able to complete the schoolwork.
They need to convene what's called a manifestation determination meeting to determine whether, well, usually that's for whether the actions are related to the disability. They can't just kick them out. No, the answer is no. So, but they should be reconvening an IEP meeting to see what's going on, why he's not completing work.
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, they can't just sort of cancel an IEP without convening an IEP meeting, usually doing assessments, trying to figure out what's going on, et cetera. They can't just say you no longer qualify and not have a basis for that, especially if a child's not able to access the services. You've got to get to the bottom of it. Here's one. What are my options if my child's teacher doesn't follow the 504 plan, which says the child can be allowed to have 50% of work? The teacher says that she's already giving the class half the amount of work she would normally give. Well, that's interesting. You have a comment about that, Jody?
Sorry, I was reading another question.
Oh, sorry. Well, it's a 504 question. And it's interesting that the teacher's saying that she's already giving the class half the amount of work she normally would give. And if it's still a problem for your child, especially given distance learning, you can ask for half the half, because that's what an accommodation is.
I would think so, yes.
Yeah. So, okay.
If class is canceled due to only one student logging in class, can that time be compensated?
I would think so. I mean, if the class is canceled, that the child who's logged in is still entitled to instruction. So
Right.
Absolutely, I would think there would be no question of compensatory time that's owed there.
And here's the question. Do you know if NPSs are being allowed to reopen at 25% capacity in LAUSD? And the answer is not right now. They're not. The non-public schools, they are, I think that they've applied for waivers, but if LA Unified is funding and they're not allowing in-person school at this point, what the roadblock we're finding is that they're not paying for the child to go to the non-public school in person.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Are they doing state mediations right now?
Yes.
They are. Mediations and hearings are going forward. Due process there was a slight delay for a few weeks while they moved everything virtually back in March, or maybe not a few weeks, few months. But then everything's been switched to a virtual format, and mediations and hearings are going forward.
In a weird way, hearings are going forward.
Right.
They're virtually pretty strange, but actually the mediations are great. It works fine, not a problem.
One of the questions has come up twice, that is the state mediation effective?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. We settle, what, 99% of our cases in mediation. Now that, you need to know that we're careful about the cases we take, and we make sure we have a good case before we file, and that a case that we think we can win. And oftentimes they're settled through the state mediation process. We do not recommend that parents go to mediation only by themselves, because most of the time they really don't understand the process and what needs to be provided to the judge and the other side in order to get a decent settlement. So,
in order to show their child was wronged somehow, so.
Let's see, kind of, yeah, there's a couple here. I'm going around here. Let's see. Some I think you've already answered. You just answered that about the NPS.
mhm.
You answered that one. He received pass on all subjects, no grades. Can the school keep him out, or could this be a form of discrimination?
A pass, no grades?
Yeah, he received pass on all subjects, no grades. Can the school keep him out, or could this be a form of discrimination?
There is more information that needs to be had to be able to answer that question, I think.
I don't think we can answer that question.
The person that put that in, if you want to add more in the chat box to that, then I can ask the presenters to give them more information.
Here's a question. My child was assessed recently and he is in first grade, and the results stated he was emerging kindergarten level. For the past 2 years, my son has been in gen ed with push-in or pull-out services, and he's still far below grade level. What are my options? Your options at this point are to go to it to request a new IEP, or it's probably indicating that since he was assessed, you're going to have an IEP, and you should talk about the options. It might be your child might need to go to a special day class in order to get appropriate intervention. Just depends. Do you have any comment about that, Jody?
No, I mean, I think that makes sense. What you just said.
Yeah.
This was at lunch. Can my child opt out of being in camera during Zoom class?
I think so. I think that's an accommodation that should be written into an IEP. If that's an issue, I think you can say, again, document it, but say, my child will check in, say hello, and then we're turning off the camera, and get just an agreement via email or have it written into the IEP as an accommodation. But I don't see why not if they're participating.
Yeah, I agree with Jody. There may be some way for the student to check in on a regular basis to let the teacher know that he or she is still there, because I think that's what's going to be important. The teacher has to document that the child was there and participating. This is a very interesting question. Our district had a 2-week shutdown with asynchronous work only because the district was hacked. When I've asked about makeup service time for that time off, my question is ignored with the district. Does that time still need to be made up? And the answer to that question is, I don't know, but what I would do is probably see if it affected my child at all. And if it did, then you could possibly ask for some compensatory services to make up for that time. I think it's going to be done on an individual basis. And it goes to the asynchronous presentation of work. I mean, if your child's not benefiting from that at all, now I have to think about what's asynchronous and what's synchronous again. I do not like these words, but anyway, if your child's not benefiting from just being handed packets of information to do, then and does benefit from the live teaching, then I would definitely ask for makeup time. So.
Oh, this is one that's always been interesting. Can the school deny an IEP if the child has mostly passing grades? And the passing grades are mostly because he gets help at home to stay on task.
Again, it's not unfortunately as cut and dry as that. You have to look at, the assessment results. You have to look at what's being provided, what supports are being provided. We can't just say yes or no. So grades are considered, but they're not the sole factor. You have to show some impact on the education. How is the education being adversely affected? But
Yeah, and I agree with Jody. However, and this is something that most parents don't want to hear, and I preface it by saying it's totally a parent choice. But if I were in those shoes, I would stop helping my child, because the district's not going to know that he has a problem if you're doing all the work with him. So yeah, you don't have to. I wouldn't tell you to do if you don't want to, but I'm telling you the district's not going to know that he's having the problems if you're doing all the work for him, unless, of course, he's bombing on tests and things that he does independently. So let's see. Let's see. I'm not sure what that question is. We read that already. Okay. All right, here's a question. What about quality of service or benchmarks? My child is undoubtedly not progressing as well as he was when he was receiving his services on campus. He's receiving the same amount of time for services that was agreed upon in the IEP, now virtually, but his progress has become more stagnant due to the online method of learning as he learns and advances much better with in-person instruction. Can this lack of progression be considered a failure by the district to meet adequate standards and be something we can recuperate once the kids return to campus by additional requesting services and a prolonged high school tenure? Wow, that's a big question that I can't answer specifically, but I can say that again, this is going to really depend on the child on a case-by-case basis, but it's going to be really important for parents to keep track of what was happening. I mean, clearly, if he's not benefiting from the virtual learning like he was from the in-person learning, then he should be eligible for compensatory educational services. Again, important to document the problems that he's having, and when you get back to school, or depending on what happens in the next couple of months, you can communicate with the school and indicate that he's not benefiting. You can call a new IEP, and then you can also go to due process. So, okay. Can you record your child during remote learning to show behaviors?
Saw that one.
Yeah, that's another privacy issue. As long as you're not recording other kids, I guess the answer is okay. But it might be a problem, and there's some privacy issues there.
Right. I don't think you can record through Zoom, but if you record just your child on your phone and there's no viewing of the screen other than, you can't see any other kids or the teacher, then I think that's probably okay.
Yeah. I mean, certainly you can record your child at home if he's running away from the screen and, having a meltdown. When this first started and they started doing this virtual learning, I've had so many of my clients tell me that they were chasing their child around with the iPad so that they could pay attention for 5 minutes while the teacher was trying to present the class. So our kids have gotten a little bit more used to sitting in front of a computer, as I guess we have too, but definitely not the same as in-person learning.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is there a mandate on time logged in to get credit for attendance on that school day? Oh, Chris.
There is. I don't know what the time is exactly, but there is a time, and it's by state law. I'd have to look that one up. Are due processes still being scheduled for this year? And the answer is yes, they are, depending on the district. LA Unified, if you filed today, you might have a hard time getting to due process before January, but the smaller districts are going through to mid-December. There's a question about regional center, but I'm not sure. I think we answered most of them.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, this one is did you answer the one, if a child's reading needs have not been met in 3 years, can I request some type of one-on-one reading service?
Yeah.
Any you'd answer that one, right? Yeah,
That's
Okay.
going to require due process.
right.
Feel free to contact one of the attorneys in our office. We can explain the process to you.
There were a couple of questions that just popped up that are sort of related. One is, if my child goes to RSP math class, but other classes are in general ed, is this considered modified curriculum? And typically RSP is not, it's still core curriculum, but you should make sure that, you know, there's not some anomaly with math for your child, and that they've actually are providing, that they're actually documenting the IEP and providing modified curriculum. And there was another question asking, if I place my son in an SDC class or a blended immersion, will he still be on track for a diploma when he gets older? He's only in the 1st grade now. So again, that depends if it's a core curriculum class or if it's an alternate curriculum class. So it really depends on your son's functioning level and the type of class, but they're not going to make that determination for a diploma track until a little later, but they could be looking at an alternate curriculum now. And if he's on an alternate curriculum, he's likely not on a diploma track.
Jody, do you see the last one here? Oh, I guess it just jumped around. There was one right before this last one I thought was interesting. Let me see if I can scroll up.
Just let me interject for 1 second. There's another question about reading and a child not making progress, being pretty far behind while being misdiagnosed for many years. You definitely, this is another case that should go to due process to get remediation for an intensive remediation reading program.
Okay, I don't know. It was just saw it here. Okay. Oh, can a district put a hold on an assessment for a residential treatment center? They are saying that since he isn't in school, they can't prove the education piece, meaning that education is being negatively impacted.
For an RTC, I missed that question.
Right.
Can a district put a hold on an assessment for a residential treatment center? There's part, you want to go?
No, go ahead. Finish the question.
Okay, they are saying that since he isn't in school, they can't prove the education piece, meaning that the education is being negatively impacted.
Right. So here's something that's really interesting, and I do a lot of RTC cases, and what I'm seeing is that there's a lot more kids going to RTC these days because they're having a lot of struggles at home accessing their education and having major behaviors at home. However, the big problem is that most of the time, because a district can't really assess the child's need for RTC right now, in terms of what you just said, having an RTC necessary in order for a child to benefit from their education, what will have to happen is that the parents will have to give notice and place the child and seek reimbursement through due process. The problem is that residential treatment centers cost a lot of money, and most families can't afford to do that. But I would tell your school district that you're having major behavioral problems at home, and he needs to have an assessment for an RTC. The other issue that I'm seeing with RTCs is that a lot of them are filled right now and they're not accepting new students. And then there's the COVID issue too. Several of them, if you start with an RTC, you have to be quarantined for 2 weeks and then tested before you can actually start with the rest of the group. And then if you leave, you have to be quarantined again. So there's a lot of issues, and RTC placements can be very expensive. So I have several cases right now where the parents have placed their children in RTCs and we're going through due process to get reimbursed.
Thank you, Dina and Jody. We have about 4 more minutes. Dina and Jody, if you want to answer maybe 1 or 2 questions, or one?
Um,
We're at 7:56.
okay. Here's an interesting question. During synchronous class, are the RSP teachers and behavioral therapists allowed to take notes on your child's behavior? I read on a New York City special kids forum that notes during virtual lessons were not allowed. And I don't see any reason why a teacher can't take notes regarding a child's behavior. I think it's pertinent to whether the child's benefiting from his or her education. So did you have any response to that, Jody?
No, I think if it's a behaviorist, if they're behavioral services and there's a behavior support plan, they may be collecting data related to that as well. So it doesn't seem that unusual, but if something doesn't feel right, I'd certainly keep an eye on what kind of data is being collected, and maybe it's outside the scope of, you know, what's reasonable.
Mhm.
Here's a question about my district's refusing to look into or present any other reading programs. They say my son's needs are addressed with what they offer. So this is a methodology question. And, you know, one, I'll call it a glitch in this area of the law, is that you don't get to choose your methodology for your child. You have to show that whatever the district's providing isn't appropriate to meet your child's needs. So in this case, if the assessment results and reading fluency and what have you is showing that the child's progressing with whatever program the district's providing, they may not need to offer anything else. On the other hand, if you can show that this program isn't working for your child because he is not making any progress in reading, well, not any, but is not making an appropriate amount of progress in reading, then you can certainly look at other means to address those needs, and that could be other programs. But don't call it method. I mean, don't say this method isn't working.
Okay, and here's one. For parents of children with regional center and need someone in home to assist their child with distance learning, to redirect them, stay focused, etc. We understand that requesting a one-to-one aid or some sort of support from school may take a while, and these services during distance learning can be authorized. And yeah, that is true. If the child's a client of a regional center, there are some regional centers that are granting additional personal attendant hours to children who qualify, and they can be provided during the school time. Oftentimes, though, regional centers are going to look at, since they're the payer of last resort, they're going to look at other generic resources. So I think that they're going to also have you look at any behavior services that through insurance. And I also think that it's going to be just a temporary situation that they will pull back on, obviously, when schools resume in person. This is a huge issue, the one-to-one aid at home, because either the student is not benefiting from the parent being the one-to-one aid, or the student needs, you know, some other type of intervention, like a behavioral intervention, or the parent's working full-time and can't sit with the student for 6 hours or 5 hours a day and work with the student. And we are trying every which way we can to figure out how to deal with this situation. And I don't have 100% answers, but we're trying. I would contact regional center, contact your insurance, contact the school district again and tell them what's going on, and see if there's any way you can come up with any solution to that problem. I don't know. I think that if I were in that situation, I would also find out about the small cohorts and see if there's any way that my child could get back to a school site at some point sooner rather than later.
Well, thank you so much to our guests tonight, and we plan on having them, I don't think they know this or not, in February. Because things are changing so often. I mean, holidays are coming up, but I'm thinking by, you know, hopefully early February, I'll definitely chat with our presenters to keep everyone informed. And I thank you so much. Again, I just want to let you know it is being recorded. This is my first time doing recording, and so I'm going to make sure that you do get the link. Just don't bug me in the morning. Give me at least the weekend, because I want to make sure that everyone gets the link. So I'll be working on that tomorrow, and if I can get it to you by the end of the day, is that tomorrow, Friday? Friday. If not, I'll be working on it Monday. So thank you so much. Make sure that you check the Family Focus Resource Center website, as well as Vanaman and Aaronson, right? Yeah, website as well. And with that, we will see you in, be safe.
Yes.
We'll see you. You had something to say, Dina?
1 second. I
Yeah,
just
go on.
wanted to add that we're going to keep our website updated, and I put the information in the chat box at the very beginning. So if you haven't accessed it, please do that quickly. But it's navlaw.net, N-E-T. And so we will also, when Teresa provides the video, we'll upload it to our website as well. And we work with Family Focus frequently on providing these kinds of programs. And if there's any particular subject matter or area that you want addressed for February, please let us know.
Yeah, thank you. Be safe and happy holidays.
Thank
And
you.
thanks,
Thank you,
Chris.
Teresa.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, ladies.
Great job. Excellent. They're so wonderful to answer all those questions, and
I know.
it's so hard to find. So
Yeah, that's what I
yeah.
love about the Kim project as well, because a lot of families, there's so many questions, and things are changing. So yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Good night.